Hey, so post-elemental mastery buff Swirl is actually kinda good now. So if you don't know the basics of Swirl and how Swirl works, I will be going over that. There was a post on Reddit a couple months back that went pretty in-depth on how Swirl works. So if you want to read that, I will link that in the description, but I will be going over it. So with how Swirl works, if we have one element on an enemy, and then we swirl it, it gets passed over to everybody else that's in range. So as you see, this guy, he used to have Hydro, but he lost it, and now these guys have Hydro. So if we use something like Pyro, we got each instance of Pyro swirl damage on everybody that was affected by it, and Pyro swirled over. So as you saw there, those enemies, the application of that specific element got passed over. But that's with just one element, so how does two elements work? So we have this one, he's going to have Pyro, this one's going to have Hydro. So if we swirl these two, we have one instance of a Pyro swirl damage and one instance of Hydro swirl damage, and then those elements got swapped around. Now Hydro is a little bit special in the sense that when you swirl with Hydro, it doesn't create an actual damage. As you can see, it just applies the wet status, but you only had one instance of Hydro swirl because I hit this specific enemy with my attack. Every other element does multiple instances of that once. So if we have here with Electro and we swirl this, it did 3 damage. It did 3 2016s on each enemy. And that's because Hydro is a little bit special than every other element. So if we were to have, let's say, Hydro and Electro, and we swirled this, we get 1 instance of Electro charge instead of 2. And that reason is because Electro, when it's swirled, it does do the damage to the other guy, but Hydro doesn't. So the Electro gets swirled over to the Hydro, creating Electro charge, but the Hydro doesn't get swirled over to the Electro, so that one doesn't create Electro charge, if that makes any sense. So now we're going to try it with Pyro and Electro. So both of them, since Hydro is not affected in that, Pyro and Electro are going to swirl each other. So we're going to have 1 instance of Electro swirl, 1 instance of Pyro swirl, and they're going to create 2 overload reactions. So we'll try that right now. 1 Pyro, 1 Electro. So we'll swirl those. You see there, we got 1 instance of Electro reaction because we swirled that one on the guy on the left. The one on the right had 1 instance of Pyro swirl because he swirled that one over. And we got 2 instances of overload because they both reacted with each other. And then we also got each individual swirl of each one when they passed that element. So just with those 2 enemies, we got 6 elemental reactions. You got 2 Pyro swirls, 2 Electro swirls, and 2 overloads. Now there is a limit to how many reactions you can have per element. It's actually limited to 2. So if we had a ton of enemies, you would only be able to swirl 2 of each element. So that's why you want to have multiple elements. So those are pretty much the basics of Swirl and how it works and why it is so strong in general. But with Sucrose specifically, it's incredibly good with her because she is a catalyst, so she can use Swirl with just her basic attack. She doesn't need a skill. And that's why if you're going to use this with, like, say, Animo Traveler, if you have Sucrose, it is just better to use her. And that's also why I believe that everybody should have Sucrose in their repertoire of characters, especially now that we're a little bit more into the game. If you have, like, resources stockpiled up, you can use them on Sucrose. So when you're building for this, like, Elemental Mastery setup, you really only need Elemental Mastery. So right now she has 515, but that is without a weapon. So if we give her, like, the Map of Mare, she has 606 Elemental Mastery, which increases swirl damage by 372%. So the thing with Swirl and secondary reactions in general, those reactions scale off the level of the character and their Elemental Mastery stat. And that's why these ones are pretty low investment. I would consider Sucrose to be a pretty low investment character, especially after 1.6, because you only need to get her level and her Elemental Mastery, which is very easy to do, because you can get your Sands, your Cup, and your Circlet with Elemental Mastery main stat. Mine doesn't have Elemental Mastery main stat because I have not farmed Viridescent in a very long time, so this is just what she had. But if you can, try to go for triple Elemental Mastery because that is just going to give you so much damage. If you also get Viridescent is incredibly good for Swirl, not just because it increases the output of the rest of your team, but it also increases the base Swirl damage. So if my original Swirl did like 2016, pre-Viridescent, post-Viridescent, it would do about 2500. So it actually affects the swirls themselves and not just damage. So like I said, Sucrose is pretty low investment in that sense because you just need to level her up. If you can go 90 to 90, that's up to you. Allegedly, the difference between 80 and 90 is about a 25-ish% damage increase, which I That's not on me, that is somebody else's calculation, but I'm just going with it. And that was pre-buff. Post-buff it would probably be the same, but it is still a pretty significant damage increase, but that is up to you. Because the only thing you need to give her is Elemental Mastery. You don't need anything else. Give her a Iridescent set because that's just going to help you overall. For Constellations, she does not need Constellations necessarily, but C2, if you can at least have that one, is incredibly useful. If you can have a C5, which technically I do as well. Wait, no, not C5. C4. If you have C4, which technically I do as well, that would increase her overall damage, and so would C6 as well. But for the purposes of this, trying to be a little bit free-to-play friendly, C2 is what we're working with. And talents, this is the big thing. She doesn't need to upgrade her talents at all. You can leave all of her talents at level 1 and she's still going to be doing a ton of damage because, like I said, because swirl reactions and electro reactions are not going to scale off any attack stat, crit rate, crit damage, nothing. It's just Elemental Mastery and just your level, which is so stupid, and that's why these reactions are in such a weird place, and that's why they kind of needed the buff, because they don't use anything. You want to build a character with crit rate, attack, crit damage, and everything, because that's just how pretty much every character works. And then you have these reactions that just use Elemental Mastery and your level. And it's like, why would you go for those ones specifically? But Swirl specifically, because she is a catalyst, it is much easier to actually trigger. So now I'm going to go to Spiral Abyss to show like what an actual application of this would be. I am going to use Beidou, Xingqiu, and Xiangling, but I'm going to give them all level 1 weapons. So this is what their stats are going to look like right now. So this is what a general team would look like. So hopefully you guys don't die too quickly. We're just going to pop all of our ults. And then just swirl. Okay, so like these guys just died really fast. But like we're doing over 2,000 damage swirl. That was a 6,000 overload reaction right there. And that's using Sucrose's, because Sucrose is applying the swirl to everybody while you are still doing overall damage with everyone. So now we can see what an actual application of this would look like in Spiral Abyss. I will be giving them back their weapons. So now we can see what an actual application of this would look like in floor 12 of Spiral Abyss. So with just one of these, we almost killed one Whopper Flower, did about 30-ish% to another, and then this guy took probably 40% of damage. That's with just one cycle, and this is with her not having as much Elemental Mastery. Now I know that Xingqiu and Beidou are still going to be doing a lot of the damage, as well as Xiangling. But the more enemies that you have, the lower investment this team actually is. So because of that specific team setup, I actually did 36 star this rotation of Spiral Abyss. It was mainly this second chamber that was dealing me a little bit of trouble because I didn't have any like form of CC for this first half for all these treasure hoarders. But with Sucrose, I actually did it with Child instead of Xingqiu. But this was the team that helped me get 3 stars on that second chamber, because it, like I said, it is just a lot lower investment for Sucrose because she just works so well with Swirl. But in a team like this, if you are going to be using the Electro reaction, I think technically Fischl would be better than Beidou just because of Fischl's Ascension passives, which would just create much more damage, but I don't have Fischl built because F2P, by the way, I don't really have the resources to build her. But if you do have Fischl built, feel free to use her instead. So I just kind of wanted to go over how good Swirl is now that it is post buff. The other reactions like Overload and Superconduct, I really don't think those are still going to be worth it. Of course, I don't have any math to back that up, so it is just my opinion, but the way, just like having played the game, my own knowledge of the game, I don't think Overload and Superconduct specific comps are going to be worth it ever, at least right now. Electrocharge will, just because Electrocharge is much better, because like I said, it is a dual element reaction, so you can trigger both Vaporize and Overload with a Pyro application. And it also creates some form of CC by staggering enemies. But other than that, the Swirl now is very strong. Like I said, it requires very low investment. You just need to level Sucrose up, and that's it. And I don't really feel like it's been talked about that much, but especially from a free-to-play perspective, having Sucrose just as a unit on your team with very low investment still being incredibly strong, people should probably take advantage of that, and that's why I did. She's always been a very strong character, but now that it is buffed by roughly 30%, that damage is really, really good. And like I said, it can only go up higher. Right now she's doing about 2 to 2.5k per swirl per reaction, and that's just going to go up a ton more if I actually do level her up. Now, none of this is new if you have been using Venti, because Venti is just ridiculous, but now Venti just got a little bit more of a buff, as if he needed it, but it's there. But if you have been using Venti, hopefully this taught you like how Swirl actually works and why it is so strong with him. So if you enjoyed the video, hope you're having a fantastic day. Like and subscribe if you want, I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one, which is going to be Spiral Abyss, because Spiral Abyss is going to reset. Bye-bye.